Hey, it's Gage from Rods and Mods, and today we are going to show you what a beginner, intermediate, and advanced cut and polish looks like. So we went ahead and prepped this panel ahead of time. I went ahead and painted like this cool blue metallic pearl, 5 coats of clear, and I'm going to show you the differences between the times and cut and polish jobs. Obviously your beginner is going to be more for just like your everyday driver. Your intermediate's going to be a little bit better, could be show, but not quite high level, and advanced will be like as far high level show car as you can get. So we'll start with beginner, and let's go ahead and show that process now. Starting with beginner here, we're going to start with 2000 grit. This is wet or dry sandpaper, and we're going to start with like a medium dense foam block. This is a Dura block. Nothing too hard, but not too soft. And we're going to wrap it around the block. We're going to take some water. And we're just going to sand the entire panel down.
So what do you look for?
So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to remove as much of the orange peel as I can. So as you can see, as I've sanded just a little bit, you can see where some of it's sanded and not sanded, and we're trying to get rid of that orange peel. Orange peel is normal coming out of the booth, especially after 5 coats of clear. And our goal is just to get it to where the whole thing is sanded like this and you no longer see any of that texture. Obviously with 2000 grit, the finer the sandpaper, the longer it takes to start sanding, especially on this first coat, on this top coat like this. And you're always trying to break that initial surface. It always seems to always take a little bit longer.
So is it something that you would do like right after like a few months, like owning a car, or if you bought a used car?
Yeah, so your best thing to do is, if it's a fresh paint job, the longer you can wait before you wet sand and polish, the better, because there's a bunch of solvent trapped inside the clear and it needs to come out as much as possible before you sand on it. If you bought something and you're not exactly sure how many coats of clear on it, definitely this beginner cut and polish is definitely safer, because you're taking off very little amount of clear. With 2000 grit, it does not take off very much clear at all, but rest assured you are still removing clear coat. Periodically, I like wiping it off so I can check my progress. As you can see, we are removing some of the texture, but there's still some texture left, especially around our edges. Are done with our 2000 grit. As you can see, most if not all the texture is gone. It's a nice even dull, which tells us that the entire panel has a fresh even sanding of 2000 grit. So my next step, something that I like to do, is I like to use powdered guide coat. Now the goal with this stuff is it's this black powder, as you can see, that's really, really fine, and it gets in all the sand scratches of the 2000 grit. So what it does is when I move on to my next step, as I'm sanding it, that black will eventually disappear, and that tells me that I have those 2000 grit scratches out of the panel. And it also keeps me from having to over sand, so I know exactly when to stop. So we just put on a fairly light coat of this. Now this is a dark color, so it's a little bit hard to see because it's black. They do make a white powdered guide coat. I just don't currently have any at the moment. But we just get that, make sure it's all rubbed in nice and even onto all those sand scratches. And then we're going to move on to 2500 grit. And then I'm also going to switch blocks to something really, really soft, something that is pliable, that kind of forms with the panel a little bit better. And the reason why I'm switching to a really soft block is because now the texture is gone, essentially, and I'm no longer removing texture, I'm just removing sand scratches. And the soft block allows it to follow the contour of the panel a little bit better. It also helps take out any block marks or stick marks from the previous grits. Just allows it to smooth out a little bit better. So as you see, as I'm sanding, the black is disappearing off the panel, ending up on the table and mixed with water, which is a bit of a mess, but to me, the mess is easy to deal with over potentially sanding through and having to repaint your panel. Try to be as thorough as possible, again, trying to remove every single 2000 grit scratch. So all that I'm left is 2500. It's looking pretty good. I'm not seeing too much guide coat, but because I can, there's plenty of clear on here, I'm just going to give it a nice thorough once over, just for peace of mind. Alright, so now that we're in 2500, we're going to move on to the buffing stage. I'm going to use 3M's Perfect Compound, and then I'm going to use a wool pad on a rotary machine. This is essentially like another polishing or a sanding stage. This is a pretty aggressive buffer, so all it's going to do is we're going to remove all those 2500 grit scratches. It's going to have its own version of scratches, but they're going to be really, really fine. It will allow us for the polishing stage to get it to a nice mirror finish.
Take 1, 2, 3, 4? Yeah. You're going to have a problem with that. Why? Because that one doesn't vacuum on the 1, 2, 3.
One tip that if you notice something that I'm doing, so this machine is rotating this way, and I'm always making sure that the pad is rotating off of the edge. I never want it to rotate into the edge because then it'll catch the edge and it'll flip it up and it'll be a mess. So I'm actually going to go ahead and turn this sideways so I can buff this edge and I can buff it off. So the main thing that I'm doing here is after I'm buffing it, I'm coming back and I'm trying to look at the reflection, and I'm trying to see if I see any other cross hatching. We're going to see some scratches that are going in an arch pattern, and that is from the wool pad. But if I see any straight scratches going any which way from my cross hatches when I was sanding, I'm going to try to get those out. I see a little bit up in this corner here, so we're going to go ahead and hit that spot a little bit more. Alright, so as you can see, the shine is now back, but we're not done yet. There's still swirl marks, very, very fine scratches, and that's from the wool pad itself. Like I said, it almost like sands it in a whole nother step, but we are shiny again, so that's good. So now we'll step up to our polishing stage, and we'll see what it looks like after that. Alright, next step, we are going to use a dual action polisher. What it just pretty much is a DA polisher. A reason why I like this over rotary polishers is I feel like I can be a little bit more aggressive on it without leaving swirl marks like you're seeing here. This is a microfiber pad made by Meguiar's. It's their microfiber cutting pad, and I find that it leaves a pretty nice finish polish. Sometimes if I feel like it's necessary, I'll go to a more finishing pad and I'll finish polish it, but this leaves a pretty good finish. So you can see just a few seconds and we're already looking a lot better. You can maybe see the difference here compared to over here. I don't know if you can see that or not in the video, but there's still swirl marks here from the wool pad. Here we're polished out, we're looking a little bit better. Continue on the rest of the panel. Okay, we'll take this tape off and we can kind of see the difference. So you can see it's shiny again, but if you can see this one here, a lot smoother, a lot more consistent versus the other side over here. You have some of your orange peel. Now I know this looks really good, but if we're talking about difference between a nice driver and a show car, there's still a little bit of ripples in the clear just from, you know, starting at such a fine grit, but overall we're looking a lot better. Alright, so we finished with our beginner step. We're going to go to our intermediate now. And with this side, I'm going to start with 1500 grit. We started with 2000 here, we're going to start with 1500. So we're moving up a little bit more aggressive. We're going to use the same block that we started with on the 2000, but because we're more aggressive, we're going to be able to sand that texture out a little bit more flat than we did with the beginning section. Alright, so like we said, we're starting with 1500 grit on the same stiff foam block that we did with the 2000. Now this is what I'm going to do. Now everyone's application is going to be different depending on how many coats of clear and the look you're going for. You could start with 1000 grit, you can start with really whatever grit you want. But I've noticed that the 1500 gives a better cut than the 2000, and it really just depends on budget, what you're going for, what your goals are, and how many coats of clear you initially started with. But because this is more aggressive, this first sand, taking that top layer off, should go a little bit quicker than it did with the 2000. So that's your trade-off. You save time by not doing so many steps with the beginner section, but you spend a little bit more time in that initial cut just because you're taking off such a little amount. So with this 1500 grit, it should speed up a little bit. I'm just working the block in cross hatches. I don't know if you noticed that from the first time, I don't want to go this way and I don't want to go like this. All that does is just put grooves from the edges of your block in your panel, and then those are really hard to sand out. So you always go at an angle so that way you're not putting grooves in your panel. Getting pretty close. About half the time it took to start with that one with 2000, we're already about in the same similar spot. So like I said before, the more aggressive it is, the faster it gets through, especially on that initial cut, because that outer layer of clear is going to be your hardest layer to get through, just because it has like that shiny film over the top, and it's just always hard on sandpaper. I'm going to chase a couple little things that I'm seeing, some little dirt that was in there before trying to get cut out. But other than that, we're looking pretty good. All I'm doing here is I choke down to a smaller block. It's made of the same material as my big block, but it's smaller. Allows me a little bit better control when I'm trying to isolate an issue and try to sand it out, instead of sanding a lot with the bigger block. So just like this one, after we initialize the first cut with 1500 grit, we're going to go back through with our powdered guide coat, and we're going to pretty much repeat the same process we did with this one to this one. So we're going to go to 2000 grit on this one, and we're going to sand all the guide coat off, and then after that we're going to guide coat it again and go to our 2500. So we're going to start sanding with our 2000 grit and our soft block. Again, the 1500 grit got most of the texture out, so all we're doing now is just removing sand scratches. Okay, that'll do it for 2000. Move on to the 2500. Again, we're going to guide coat again. As I step up in grits, the finer the grit, usually the less the guide coat, especially when we hit around 2,000 to 2,500 mark. Sometimes if you have too much guide coat, it'll clog up the paper before the paper actually sands the panel. I do still put it on liberally. I want every single scratch filled in. I'm not concerned about having black everywhere. It just kind of is part of the job. Okay, we're switching back to the 2500 grit for our final sanding step. And like that. Did not like that. Be wary sometimes, depending on your environment. There can be dust floating in the air. And just like I did right there, I start sanding and I can slightly hear and slightly feel a little bit of dirt between the block and the panel, and all you're going to do is just scratch the hell out of clear coat. So if you hear that, notice that, stop immediately, change paper, clean off your block, clean off your panel, start again. Okay, fresh paper. So we got through our 1500 grit, our 2000, our 2500, and then our buff with our wool pad, and now we're going to move on to the final polish with our dual action cutting pad. And we're going to take out all these swirls and make it nice and shiny again. Alright, that looks pretty good. There's a couple things that maybe I could chase, but I think for right now we'll leave it as that. And I was looking. Alright, so for the final one, for the expert, we're going to do something a little bit different than we did in the first two. And the biggest thing being our block choice. So we're going to use really hard acrylic block. So it has a little bit of flex to it, which is kind of what I want a little bit. But the biggest thing is it's hard. It's actual acrylic. We'll use a couple different ones. Now if we're doing a big panel like a hood or a corner panel or a roof, I'll use something a little bit longer. But again, very rigid, very hard. And the biggest reason why we're doing that is because when it's hard, it will cut down the tops of the orange peel. Think of the orange peel like a bunch of rolling hills. And this is just going to skate along the top and sand only the tops of those down flat. The hard foam does that too, but not as good. It will eventually start following the contour. So you can get it flat, but you can't get it perfectly flat. And that's where these hard blocks come in. The biggest thing about the hard block though is if you start with too fine a grit on the hard block, the hard block is really harsh on the paper. So the finer the paper, the more you're going to have to constantly change out your paper because it's going to start getting clogged with clear. So we're going to start with something a little bit more aggressive. We're going to start with 800 grit. Now everyone starts at different grits. If I'm doing like a really high-end show car, I'm going to put a little extra more clear, and I might even start with 600. But you can achieve a pretty good look with 800. Most car show guys will start with 800. Again, I've done it all the way from 600 all the way up, but we're going to start with 800 today because we've got 5 coats of clear, and we're still going to finish with a really nice, flat, mirror-like finish on this panel. So because this is more aggressive, we are going to be able to cut through this first hit on this wet sanding quicker than we did on the first two. Just like how the 1500 was a little bit faster than the 2000, this one is going to cut through a little bit quicker, but because we were using a hard block, it's going to be a lot more honest with us about where we are at in getting the orange peel off. Alright, as you can see, we still got more sanding to go. One thing I want to point out, so on your edges, clear seems to always want to build up on the edges and you get kind of like a roll. So that's what you're seeing here, and it kind of goes all the way around, which is completely normal. Some painters get a little nervous about sanding up on the edge, but that's where using a hard block comes in handy because it will actually sand off of the edge and no part of it will actually roll over. So I know I got good clear buildup on this edge because you can see it where it's sanding really hard on the edge but not right next to it, it's still shiny. So that means there's a lot of clear buildup. I'm okay sanding all the way to the edge and sanding that completely flat because I know that there's enough clear. And using a hard block allows you to be able to sand it off without rolling over and potentially burning through. So don't be afraid to get right up on that edge, because at the end of the day, if you're doing car show quality, you can't have that thick edge with clear on your panels. Splashed water in here.
Oh no, you're good. You didn't get me. That's what happens. It's part of the job. To get that shot, sometimes that's what happens. So you going up and using the same block now?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a little bit smaller one. I'll explain it in a second.
Okay, cool.
Alright, we're getting pretty close. We want to be super thorough though, and we don't want to see any of this little texture showing up. What you're seeing there is the glossiness from the low parts of the orange peel. So we know for a fact the orange peel is not all the way out. We're looking fairly decent in the center section, which is normal. Now the biggest thing that's important when you want to sand with a really hard block like what we've been doing is that your body work is straight and consistent. The least straight your panel is, the harder it is going to be, especially using a little bit longer of a block, because if it's not straight, it's going to have a hard time going with the contour of the panel. Now because it's for testing purposes, we didn't body work and prime this like we would normally a car, so the panel itself isn't the straightest, which is totally fine for this example. But because of that, I'm going to shrink down in block size a little bit. I was sanding with this, now I'm going to something like this. Biggest thing is I still get the hardness that still allows me to cut all the orange peel out, but because it's a little bit smaller, it will go with the contour of the panel a little bit because it's not the straightest panel in the world. grit step is done. Panel is guide coated. Now we're switching over to 1000 grit, and we're sticking with the hard block. Might be slightly redundant because the texture is already out of it, but I always feel like if you stick with the hard block on that 1000 grit, you'll get anything that you potentially missed. Most of the time you can switch straight to a hard foam block when you move up in grits, because at this point, like I said before on all the other ones, that we're just removing sand scratches. But sometimes it doesn't hurt to go back over with a hard block again and make sure that you got all that texture removed. Alright, 1000 grit step done. Moving on to 1500 grit, and we're going back to the hard foam block. Guide coat down, of course. Alright, so we worked all the way through our grits, starting at 800, 1000, 15, 2000, and then we finished in 2500, just like we did on the two previous panels. So we're going to go ahead and do our normal wool rotary buffer, and we're going to start there. Finished our third and final section. I went ahead and just ran the polisher over the whole entire thing just so we could make sure we got everything that we needed. And it's looking pretty shiny. And honestly, all three sections look pretty good. Now the third section, the one where we started with 800 grit, definitely has more of like a mirror-like reflection. Now again, the panel itself is not completely straight because we didn't take the time to bodywork it and make it straight, but I do think we are looking pretty good. I like obviously the high-end one. It's a little dusty. A little bit straighter. You can see kind of the line where we started and stopped. Alright, so that concludes our test panel of 3 different stages of cut and polish. Now it might not show up perfectly on camera. That's why paint and body always looks good on Instagram. But you can tell a difference, especially here in person, so any customers that we have come in, we can show them the difference so they can kind of pick what they want. This one obviously is more of a mirror. These two are pretty similar. This one has a little bit more of a flatter finish, but again, it'll be all depending on what people want, what their budget is. So that's how you do those different stages, and hope you learned something.